Perfect.
And so maybe you could just give a short introduction to yourself and then start giving the seminar.
Absolutely. I'll just share my screen and I'll begin. Right. Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you all. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of this seminar. I've been stalking the website, seeing who else has spoken, and I'm very thrilled to be one of those people now. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark, and I am a Teaching Excellence Fellow at the School of Computing at the Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, Scotland. So Teaching Excellence Fellow is actually a great role for someone like me. I've built my career researching computing education and researching pedagogy, and I've been doing it ever since I can remember doing research. I was meant to be a software engineering research person, but I never was really. I was always looking at education even before I knew education was something you could research. So in the past decade or so, I've done many different projects and many different bits of work. I've looked at how students transition into higher education. I've looked at their concerns. I've looked at how they learn and why they learn. I've looked at assessment styles. And now something else has happened and something else has changed in how we teach, and that is COVID. 2 years ago, COVID changed absolutely everything. And it was, for many, a very difficult time, including myself. But it was also a good opportunity to start looking at all these different things that were happening in how we taught our students and how we were learning. I will say later today that, COVID catapulted us into the future of teaching and learning. I very much believe that the things we're doing now, we were going to end up doing anyway. Just instead of taking 24 hours to make those decisions, we would have probably taken 10 years. And I think that's a really interesting thing to start researching and to start looking at. So that happened. And then since then, I've been working with a bunch of people to start to understand the impact that COVID has. And that's been kind of published in various bits and pieces. So we've done a few BOFs at 6E. We had a big working group at Adaptations last year, which is what I'll spend most of this seminar talking about. And then there's more work going on this year, which I'll tell you about at the end. So I guess we'll start here with that working group at Adaptations. So the working group last year was really in the middle of the pandemic. We started the idea of the working group in 2021, and we really wanted to get an international perspective on how staff members reacted to COVID, how we changed the way we teach, and how it's impacted us. Because, well, at the time when we started this working group, there wasn't any research really that was published, because of course, published research takes a few months to get out there. And we felt it was really important to get a global perspective if we could and start to archive that knowledge. And what we hope is that in time, people can look back at that working group to start to see the beginnings of change and to start using that to spin off other bits and pieces of probably better research. Anyway, we set out to do an international survey. You see on the screen there where people were from when they responded. Ideally, we'd have someone from each country, but of course, that never happens because of the mailing lists we were using and because of our contacts within our institutions, within our circles. What you see there is we have a very westernized approach to our knowledge now. It would have been lovely to get responses from Asia, from more of Africa. Unfortunately, we couldn't reach these people, but our survey is still out there. If there's any way you can help us reach these people, please let us know, because it'd be great to add to the knowledge bank we already have. But still, we gained an international perspective of computing educators, and that is what the next bits and pieces will be all about. So the paper itself is obviously very interesting, and it's about 30 pages long, and I highly encourage you to read it if you haven't. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out some interesting bits and pieces that I think may help us reflect a bit better on the impact of COVID. So one of the first questions we asked people was, how did you teach before COVID? How did you teach online before COVID? Sorry. And this is the pie chart that kind of shows those responses. So you can see here that 93% of respondents said that pre-COVID, pre-2020, they did very little online teaching. And this is something I remember very well for myself. Before 2020, I did no online teaching. The idea of going on Zoom or on Skype at the time and doing an online lecture was ridiculous to me. Why would I do that? There was absolutely no point. And then we asked this question, which is, well, what percentage of online teaching do you do during the pandemic? Remember, this study was 2021, so smack bang in the middle of COVID. And the numbers change very dramatically. Suddenly you have, 57% saying, well, either high or very high use of online teaching. And of course, again, I was one of them, because I went from zero experience of online teaching to suddenly everything I was doing was online. And I thought, well, this is a really interesting shift, because if you are an online teacher pre-COVID, you've probably gained those pedagogical skills. You've probably learned to produce content in an adequate manner. If you're an online learner before COVID, well, you've made the decision to become an online learner. So that means that you've made certain adjustments to your life to allow for that. But now suddenly, in the middle of the pandemic, we had people who are suddenly teaching online and people who are suddenly learning online. So you have face-to-face teachers teaching online and face-to-face learners learning online. And that dynamic is something that I still think is really, really interesting and merits a lot more exploration. Here we have a question that says, what was your first use of technology? So obviously, as computing educators, we're all aware, even before the pandemic, that online lectures existed. But what we were trying to get to here was, did you use these technologies for the first time during the pandemic? And what you see there is about 78%-ish of our respondents used online lectures for the first time during COVID. 75 point something percent used formal communication tools. So that's things like Microsoft Teams and Slack with their students for the first time during the pandemic. And then the numbers get a bit lower. So about 60% used document collaboration, Google Docs, things like that for the first time. Informal communication tools, things like WhatsApp and Discord with students, is a bit lower than 50%. And then real-time quizzes is around about 35-ish%. But what you're seeing here is people's reported first use of technology. So when these people responding to the survey were thinking of, the time of COVID, they were thinking, well, it's the first time I've done an online lecture. It's the first time I've had to engage using Slack with students. It's the first time I've had to share documents collaboratively with them. And what this kind of leads us to is there's been a lot of pedagogical change, and the pedagogical change that was happening was by and large very sudden. Overnight almost, people were creating Slack channels and Teams spaces and putting students on them. And a lot of people, myself included, were very much learning as they were going on. If I look back to my first online lectures, they were probably very, very bad. And if I look at my first Slack and Teams setups with my students, they were probably not very good, because due to the way COVID just impacted everything so quickly, there wasn't really any time to reflect and think and, go and do research and figure out how to make this better. So as COVID goes on, then you start to find out that people's use of technology and students' expectation of technology gets better. As we all settled into the new life and as students settled into the way of learning, things became a little bit more symbiotic and a little bit better. But I think I really like this slide because it shows that it's not just about teaching online, right? It's not about that dramatic shift overnight, but it's also about getting used to a bunch of different tools. You may have been aware of them, but you may not have used them. And then suddenly they become everything you need to do in your working life. This question here is quite a nice one as well. We asked the respondents, how do you feel your teaching practice went during COVID? So they had to rate their own understanding of teaching practice. And what you see here is we have really, really high agree and strongly agree scores. I think a combined 85-ish% of people said that they felt that teaching through COVID has positively increased their teaching practice. And now this is very, very exciting because it could have easily gone the other way. You know, there's all these tools, it's been terrible, and I don't feel I could do my job properly. But instead, what we see and what we heard from people, even outside of computing education, was, well, I had to take this time to learn. I had to take this time to go look at journals and at conferences and listen to seminars and get best practice from other people that I could incorporate in my own practice. So that was very, very exciting. People started to see more of a value to their pedagogy. We heard from people who were saying things like, you know, I've taught this course for 5 years pre-COVID, and for those 5 years, there's been very little change. You know, maybe there's been a few tweaks here and there, but by and large, the module was very stagnant. And then suddenly COVID came, and that was the right catalyst to redo the module, to rethink everything. And we've heard from lots of people about how they want to maintain a lot of what they've done. There's been positive changes to the way they teach that they hope can be kept post-COVID as well. And that is good to see because it means that things have been applied properly and that they've increased, in some cases, the value of learning and teaching. But it's not all very positive, I'm afraid to say. At one point during the survey, we asked people about their understanding of well-being and mental health. So what you see at the top there is the question, how do you think your colleagues' well-being was during the pandemic? And basically red is bad. So what you see there is a huge chunk that says very negative. You know, I thought my colleagues' well-being was very bad. And the second question, the bottom one there, is how do you perceive your students' well-being during pandemic? And this is maybe even worse because you have quick maths, 68 plus 14, 70, 82% saying bad. You know, students' well-being during the pandemic was negative. And this is difficult because on one hand, we're saying, well, COVID was very, very good from a teaching perspective because it allowed for a lot of positive change in how we teach and how we develop our courses. But at the same time, on the other side of this coin, you have a very negative impact on everyone's mental health. So where do we go from here is the question. Oh, and I had a slide on that. So advancements have been made, but the impact on mental health has been severe. And then we start to explore this idea a little bit better. So this was my title slide, which I skipped over. So the title slide was computers plus COVID equals what? And I think that's wrong. I think it's computers plus us as lecturers, as teaching staff, as admin, plus COVID equals what? Because we're a really integral part of that equation, right? And that's what the study was trying to uncover. So that working group study concluded with 3 recommendations that we make, and we are very hopeful that institutions take these recommendations on board. The first is to nurture education and pedagogical research across staff, not just staff interested in pedagogy, but all staff, so that they can start making decisions for their teaching that are backed by pedagogical value. The second is to leverage the use of technology in teaching, because suddenly we've had such a dramatic shift with the use of tools such as Zoom and Teams and Blackboard and everything else, that it would be a shame to just go back to teaching in person and not recognize the value that some of these tools take. As an example, my institution, we've been talking about recording face-to-face lectures since I started there, so for about 7 years. And then suddenly overnight, everything was recorded. And it was as easy as clicking a button. You no longer needed to worry about where the camera was in the room and making sure you were walking at the right angle for the camera to catch you. So something like that, students are now used to a recording. They're used to a fairly good quality image of my face and a very good quality voice and my slides front and center. They want to keep that. So how do we use this and also go back to class in a way that adds value to their teaching? And the third recommendation we made was to support staff and student well-being, that even coming out of COVID, there is still a big deal of work to be done on supporting people's mental health through all these changes. And that is something institutions should keep at the forefront of their decision-making. So then I modify my title slide a little bit more. I add the student in the middle. So it's not just COVID plus us plus computers equals what, but also when you add the student in the mix, what happens? And that really informs the next part of our research, which is currently happening. So through the working group, we've got a good understanding of the staff perspective. We understand how our respondents have reacted to COVID, how they have found the experience of teaching through COVID, and the various repercussions that they feel have come out of COVID. That's a great starting point. But we're very, very conscious of the fact that we're missing a whole other chunk of the story, and that's our students, because we didn't ask them anything. So we currently have a working group starting at UpCERG to try and uncover a little bit more of the student experience. And the reason we do this is because we have seen dramatic shifts in how our students learn and also how they approach studying and how they approach education. And I'll give you an example from my own context. Our incoming students, so our brand new baby first years, have missed out on a huge chunk of their education. For many of them, they've not needed to do any exams in high school, which means they've lost the skill of studying and they've lost the skill of going into a room and applying knowledge, and they've lost the skill of time management, and maybe they've even lost the skill of note-taking. So suddenly in first year, we have students that maybe need a lot of reminders on how to study and what our expectation is of them and how much time they should spend outside of the classroom working on things and how they take notes and even how they should ask questions and how to be critical about what we're saying to them. All of that is missing, and we need to look at how we build that into their education moving forward. Our existing students, so the ones that were already our students when COVID started, have had a tremendous amount of disruption during COVID because we didn't know what was going to happen. So suddenly in 2020, they were told, you need to go online for the rest of the semester, but you'll come back on campus. And then they were told, oh, there's now a new variant, so maybe you'll stay online for a few more weeks. And then that turned into months. And then they were told you'll come back in 2021, and that never happened. Or if it did, it was very, very small and very, very different. So our existing students have had a massive disruption in their expectation. And there was never any consistency because no one could predict the future. So now that we're slowly emerging from the pandemic, it is so important to give consistency to the messaging we give our existing students. And to tie all of this together, this is the first time in history, or in our history, that any of this has happened. So we don't understand the impact that any of this will have on the students, on our teaching, and on their future as graduates. So we feel as a working group that's really important to start investigating all of this, which is why we have a working group. And we're in initial stages. We're developing a survey that we hope will go out to students, and we hope that you can help us distribute it once it's ready to go. So to start summarizing, because I don't really like speaking that much at people, the impact of COVID on computing education. So as I said at the start, COVID has catapulted us into the future of teaching and learning. I believe that the changes that we have seen, the reliance on online lectures, on using Slack and Teams and Zoom and what have you, was always going to happen. It just happened overnight instead of taking 10 years. So this is very exciting. As an educator and as a pedagogical researcher, this is a really exciting thing to see happening. And it's really important, I feel, that we document this, that we archive this, and that we understand this, and that we preserve this for future research. I also firmly believe, and my team from the first working group firmly believe, we cannot look backwards. One thing that I always found very worrying at the start of COVID, and even now, is when institutions say, we'll go back to the way things were, we'll go back to teaching fully on campus, we'll go back to using the things we used before. And I think that's really damaging, because as I have hopefully shown through this seminar, and as we show much better in the EdXC working group paper, there have been a lot of positive changes to our subject because of COVID. Not everything was positive, but a lot of things were, and it is really important that we maintain them and we grow up on them. And we can only do that when we teach people to recognize positive pedagogical change. And that leads me to my final point, which is that we should not progress blindly. We should not just make change because of change, but we should really be making change with the understanding and the backing of pedagogical research. And that will be a wonderful, wonderful thing. So that's it for me. If you have any further thoughts, I would appreciate speaking about this further. So that's my contact details, and I'll stop there for any questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. No, I think this is very timely. It's, as you say, I mean, yes, we were thrown into this, and it's also interesting to think about what will we do now, and of course there is also some sort of uncertainty. Do we really know what's going to happen in the fall? Will we get another variant, or have we sort of gone? Just an example, we submitted a paper to FIE here, and we're looking at a guy who actually for 2 or 3 years have been offering both on-site and online versions of a database class, and have during this time asked them about what they prefer, why they make this choice instead of that choice. And in the title we had something like, it was saying during the pandemic, and then we had a discussion about, do we really dare to say during, kind of implicating that this is over? But anyway, I think you definitely have hit a lot of interesting points, and I think it's a very good time for research, as you said. I mean, like, because you're gonna hit, and this is sort of, sorry, I'm giving a bit of a speech here, but when we started to do our research, when we started UpCERG, part of that was kind of like, we want to know, we want to have arguments for why we do things. And I think this is because, and I think, well, this might vary from place to place, but I'm pretty sure that many places, many institutions are saying, oh, well, COVID is over, let's go back to the way things were. And even though I was a bit surprised at your numbers, that the teachers were that positive about it, maybe you got the more, most of those who were asking were enthusiasts or something like that, but still,
it's maybe worth remembering as well that we ran the survey during the summer months, so a lot of people would have perhaps stopped teaching as well, and that tends to make people reflect upon their journey through the semester in a little bit more positive light.
No,
I don't doubt that if I asked the question halfway through the semester that we would have got a slightly different answer.
Yeah, but I think whatever reason, and I think that's kind of an argument for why we really should be thinking about. What's the good thing? And I would be a bit hesitant about saying, well, this is the future in a way, because people could read that as kind of like that scrap on-site education, or which I don't think you mean, but well, yeah, no, let's let some other people talk as well, but I think this is quite interesting.
I can talk a little. Hey, killarna där.
Oh.
Hi, I'm sorry I don't have a picture because I'm not feeling very well today, so I thought it was better to...
I'm sorry to hear that.
It was very interesting reflections and presentation, I think. I have several thoughts. I'll try to summarize one of the thoughts now. And looking back at our university, how it worked, so the overnight change, more or less, came in March 2020, and there were several teachers that just had to change overnight their teaching and their assessment. This was also in the midst of the exam periods, so it was lots of exams that turned from hall exams to online exams just with 2 days notice. But then in the fall, teachers who hadn't taught during the spring but didn't have any teaching during the fall, they had a different experience, I perceived, because they had the experience from their colleagues who were exposed to this in the spring to rely on. And also they had students that were more used to this after having used this a few months. So I think there might be a difference of experience comparing teachers that was thrown into this and teachers that were exposed to this like 4 to 6 months later. So that was one thing I think can be interesting to look at. The differences between these different groups of teachers. Looking at our department, I think one thing that was very good at our department was that we got quite a lot of support from the department. Someone went downtown and bought all the web cameras they could find at some store, and they made sure that we had equipment at home so that we could conduct good online teaching. So we were given headsets, web cameras, good lighting, green screens, iPads, so we could do like, yeah, all kind of things were just thrown at us in support-wise. So I think we had pretty good situation in our department. I don't know if Mats and Anna agrees on that, but I thought it was very good. Comparing to when I talked to colleagues at other parts of the university that didn't have that kind of support. And when I talked to colleagues at the teacher training program, like those who teach linguistics and such, we went to a retreat in October, and they said that they thought this was horrible because they hadn't had the support and maybe didn't feel as comfortable with using this technology change or the equipment as much. So I think, as I understood, your survey was mainly CS teachers, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it might be interesting to repeat this for a wider circle and see how teachers from different disciplines perceive this, because I imagine you would be getting very different results, and also maybe differentiating between these first wave teachers and the second wave, if you understand what I mean. So that was just two thoughts that popped into my mind, and now I will.
Thank you for that. Not at all. You never did shut up. No, I think I agree with you. So your first thought about different teacher groups, it's not a question we ever asked, and that's partly because the way the working group runs, there's such a long preparatory time that between us creating the survey and then getting the survey approved by the different ethics boards, more time had passed than we expected. And in fact, we've preempted this a little bit with our student survey, where we asked students to select which of 3 or 4 groups they fall in so we can slice the data appropriately. But I agree with you. We need to, if we ever run the survey again, we need to figure out what experience people have had during COVID, because everyone expected COVID to be something that lasted only a few weeks, and then it ended up lasting 2 years, and everyone had a different entry point in where they started teaching. And I think you're absolutely right in saying that experience changed or was molded perhaps by the interaction that colleagues had with each other, especially if you're not teaching and you're only, view into the sudden strange world of online teaching was to hear your colleagues talk about it positively or negatively, depending on context. So that would be very exciting to look at. In regards to department support, you're absolutely right. We were supported very well as well, but I have also heard many horror students from people who were just told to teach on their phones because there wasn't a budget, or to teach without a video because, well, your internet connection at home is not strong enough and there's nothing we can do about it. And of course, those decisions impacted students negatively. I have many horror stories, and I'm not going to share them all here because I don't want to end on a downer, but not everyone had a good experience, even within computing. And then to your last point, I absolutely agree. And I have said this throughout COVID. We're very lucky because we are computing educator researchers. So we understand computers, right? I was a bit nervous about opening Teams for the first time and clicking the video button, but that was a social fear, not a technical fear. My students had zero concerns with going online and typing messages to me because that's what they do all day long, because they're on Discord and WhatsApp and Messenger. This was just another window to them. In fact, the big struggle we had was teach them how to behave professionally, because they had zero context of how to not share certain jokes and certain gifs with me in a professional lecturing context. But yes, if we open up the survey, and we really do want to open up the survey outside of computing, I expect to see a lot of these nuances come across, because then you start to add the layer of familiarity with the technology and comfort with the technology. And I think as you start to go outside computing, those numbers will drop quietly across staff and students. So that experience will dramatically vary.
So can I just ask a quick question, follow-up? I noticed in one of your early slides, you had written a paper that was called something like becoming a CS1 student during the pandemic or something like that. So is that about how new students entering the university are perceiving this new situation? Is that what that paper is about?
That was a birds of feather session for the SIGSI, so it's an extended abstract rather than a paper. And the idea behind ABOF, if you've never done one, is it's a discussion group. So they put you, if your abstract's accepted, you get to go in a room for an hour and just have a discussion, much like this. So that discussion started off talking about the challenges that we thought students would experience. Remember, this was at the start of 2021, so we were all thinking, oh, COVID's almost over.
The reason I'm asking is because we had a lot of discussion locally here about the students that began their studies during the pandemic, how they experienced the transition into higher academic studies, and their first meetings with the university that was mostly online. We had some on-campus activities for new students, but that's why I was curious about that. But okay, so it's a buffing.
It's a buff, but it's something that we're really looking at, because the student experience is really, really different. At RGU, our final year students have finished, so last week we were able to hold a barbecue for them just to celebrate, and for many of them that was the first time they had to come on campus, because everything else had been online. And it was a very strange situation for them to see their campus for the first time on their last day of class. It was also a very strange situation for me, having people know my name when I didn't recognize them, because of course they don't put their cameras on, so they know me and I don't know them, and that was just very strange. But yes, it's something we're looking at during the second working group, which is what is the experience that people have. And what is the value or the disadvantage of it? We don't know.
We had a seminar yesterday in Mint. Anna was arranging it with Stefan Herinsky, and talked about blended learning. And I think some of the stuff that comes up here did come up, especially during the discussion yesterday, about sort of who benefits and who don't, and kind of and also problems like you mentioned. Well, yeah, someone was pointing out that, well, some areas in UK, for instance, well, you really don't have the access as a student to this. And we are kind of assuming that everyone has good access, which is not the case. But so anyway, I mean, I think it's very interesting to try to understand the pros and cons of this, and how do you go forward? How do you, I mean, it's sort of like this idea of let's go back to how things were seems quite stupid, right? As you pointed out, but how do we argue for it? How do we have good scientific sort of basis for talking about what to do next, and also maybe understanding what kind of problems are we going to encounter here? So yes, Anna, maybe you want to follow up on or fill in from the meeting. I think it was connected to this.
Yeah, I think you're right that they're connected. Of course they are. I can't remember real now, because I was thinking about something different.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
About, and I think you mentioned it a little bit, because I mean, we have, and I guess you have in UK too, we have like bachelor programs and master programs perhaps that are completely online, and we had that before the pandemic. And normally I would say that people would say that those students miss something really important. Okay, and I wonder if you know if someone has actually done some research, because now we have students who has missed 2 full years of their 3 years program, not being at campus. I mean, what things did they actually miss? Even though some teachers said that they actually improved their teaching during the pandemic. I mean, students didn't know each other, really. They only met online. So, I mean, there are social aspects of it. Some people make their social network during their studies, and they use it in their careers afterwards.
Absolutely.
And I guess their knowledge, general skills maybe that you miss. So what do you know about that?
So you're absolutely right. First of you, I should say there's absolutely a place for on-campus teaching. What we're trying to do with these studies is simply provide an evidence base and allow people to start building a language so they can start discussing what situation works best for them. Now, with regards to what's missing, I think that's such an interesting angle, because when you decide to be an online student, so pre-COVID, you make the decision knowing certain things, right? So when I decide to be an online master student, I know that my interaction with people is going to be very minimal. I know that presumably there's going to be a huge expectation on me to engage with material in my own time and at my own pace, and that I am going to be a responsible learner and ask questions and go to tutorials, and all that is known by me as a student before I start. But now we're dealing with students who want to be face-to-face because they signed up to an on-campus experience, but they need to learn online. So they presumably want to meet each other and they want to chat with each other and they want to go out with each other, and they don't necessarily have the skill set to sit and watch an hour-long video and then attend a flipped classroom to discuss it. But that's what we've put them into. So even though we have the pedagogy and the skills to teach online, I fully believe that this is a different kind of online that we need to start addressing. With regards to what they're missing, oh my word, you're right, they're missing socialization, they're missing networking, they're missing learning to speak and learning to debate and learning to ask for help when they need it. They're missing really silly things like being professional and the untold expectations of how to behave in a professional environment. As an example, one of the classes I taught, still teach, is project management. We use real clients and work in sprints with students. And I had to spend 20 minutes speaking to my class, explaining the importance of switching on your camera when you're speaking to an external person, the importance of making your bed when you have someone external seeing into your room, the importance of tidying around you. I don't want to see your dirty socks, and neither does the CEO of this company. And these are things that I'd like to believe our face-to-face students pre-COVID would have somehow known. But of course, these students that are in their bedroom 24/7 for 2 years maybe don't, and maybe there's social skills we need to teach them, who knows. But yes, a lot has been missed. You're right.
Well, I don't know, because I think there is research on this, which I don't know about. That's what I was thinking. Perhaps you knew about the research. But
if there is, we'll find it when we start our student work.
I really believe that students that sign up for distance education, like pre-COVID, I'm 100% sure that most of them had not a clue of what they were missing, because many people will not. The thing is that many of our students, they manage their whole education because they have friends and they help each other. And they get to know that this guy, this girl is helpful, will help. I can work with this, I can work with that. This person knows this and that. And without that, when I started as a PhD student, I thought, okay, I will do a PhD in computing education. Probably no one will be able to help me, but I can manage on my own because I've always managed my studies. Afterwards, I realized I would not have managed without the help from the group that I have to actually take into. I mean, so students are ignorant, and I mean, not in a bad sense. It's just that you don't know what aspects of the role models, for example. I guess Virginia, if she had been here, she couldn't be here, could have helped us with something, because I think that there is something in the environment, in the physical meeting, that is important. And yesterday someone talked about that a problem with a distance learning. They knew about students who had to go to the bathroom to sit and study because there is no place at home that was not very loud, So that's a few things, and I think it would be interesting to because I don't even think that we know in advance the advantages and disadvantages. Well, I think actually there is research on the silent skill. Tacit knowledge is the word that you miss. You miss when you're not on campus. I think that's interesting.
But
that's very interesting. Oh, sorry, I'll let you speak.
Yeah, what you're talking about now, Anna, I think it's interesting, but what's also important to remember is this varies from university to university. So yes. For instance, in Uppsala, we don't have really huge classes, really. And I heard, well, I talked to some students who have studied also at KTH before coming here, and they said that the socialization, or what you said, interaction between students is much stronger in Uppsala than in Stockholm, just because of the size of the programs. So you are much more anonymous in Stockholm compared to in Uppsala. So this student experience that you're describing, I think that might vary also a lot between different.
Oh yes, you're right. And also, like in Sweden, so my sister's mother-in-law just had her 100th birthday, and she's really a computer freak, you know. She's ordering things online. Okay. I mean that's fun, but this is what people do. Sweden, everyone has a computer.
But having said that, so I'm teaching now second-year students who began their studies fall of 2020 then. And when we went back from online to campus here in the end of January, February, something like that, it was so fun to watch them for the first time. They had never been on the campus. They had never seen this new house that we went into. Well, we hadn't either. They had worked together, but some of them hadn't even seen each other because not everyone had a camera. So it was very fun. It was almost like when you let the cows out in the spring, kosläpp. They were so happy and about and getting together. But then another thing emerged also, and that was sorry, because of the distance education. Sorry, not all students had moved to Uppsala. There were lots of students that were still living at home in different places of Sweden. So we had to, during the spring, have some kind of hybrid education because not everyone were able to be on campus. They didn't bother to move to Uppsala if you can't experience the student life, right? Then it's cheaper to stay home. And that was also an aspect that we hadn't foreseen. But I think now, hopefully, the pandemic is, if not over, then at least not so problematic anymore. So we will have a normal student cohort coming in this fall, and everything will get more or less back to normal with some online experiences. I can also say in that course, as you mentioned also during the presentation, we have some parts that we do online just because we think it's better, like grading programming assignments. For instance, much better. We don't have to book a full computer lab to sit down with students. We do that over Zoom instead, much better. So I think we will definitely continue to have some parts of the education online, as you mentioned. Sorry, now I'll shut up.
No, not really.
I want to add one thing, actually, if that's okay. I can't speak about Uppsala or KTH because I'm not very familiar with either of those things, but I should say that I have seen some classes with very large amounts of students do the social aspect really well. I've seen some people take a lot of time and effort in setting up the right amount of breakout rooms with the right amount of time and supervision and making sure that students got the right social interaction. But I will also say that one of the big problems with online is if a student doesn't want to participate, if a student doesn't want to speak to people or be part of the social aspect that we're building for them, it is much easier for them to become invisible than it is on campus. And that's one of the big dangers of online, I think. If a student wants to be invisible, they can. On campus, there's a limit to how much you can do that.
Yeah. No, I think two things here. Another seminar we had, what's his name, Susanna, who talked about a study on students, successful students, or students who are dropping out, or students who are getting behind. And if I remember right, I think one of the key things were the socialization aspect. How to form a group, how to become a part of a group. And I think it was especially noticeable for the students who kind of went straight through. They formed groups, they formed communities where they could interact, they could get help. And some of the students who didn't succeed that well. Part of the reasons for getting behind was that they didn't get connected to a group. They felt like isolated, and then suddenly they could form groups with other people who also were outside, and suddenly things went better. So I think that's I think there's probably evidence for why this is important, and then, as you pointed out, Mark, there, of course, you can online, you can try to create communities, you can try to do things like, but I think it's a bit harder because it's you're more restricted to, yeah, the cows are happy.
This is a big thing in Sweden. People go visit. The cows are let out in the summer.
Yeah.
So these are Lars-Åke students. This is how he described the students.
Yeah, but
And
another
some
thing,
of the staff as well, I think, excited to be back outside.
yeah. But also one of the things that, I mean, I typically have meetings with Roger McDermott.
Sorry, Mats, for that.
No. No, I think part of actually forming a group is to have fun, right?
Absolutely.
It is, definitely.
And but anyway, it's been kind of, I think he's been quite bogged down, and part of that is the increase in academic misconduct hearings that he has to attend to. So cheating or not behaving properly. Do you have any comments on that, Mark?
I think we have seen across many institutions a rise in students cheating, if you will, plagiarizing or committing collusion or what have you. But a lot of the time, what you also see, I think, is students don't always know where the line is, and they cross the line before they even know there is a line. Many times I have heard from students who are pulled up because they've copied each other's work, and then they go, oh, we were just helping each other. I shared my screen to show this person how to do something. And of course, they did the same thing in the end. But I think being online, perhaps, I spoke earlier about how it kind of muddies a little bit the professional boundary. Maybe it also muddies a little bit their understanding of expected professional academic behavior, and we need to be much clearer in setting these boundaries. Or maybe they're just looking for an easy way out, and the easy way out is, of course, to work together, and they hope they don't get caught. I don't really know that. Well, Roger's working on that. He has a lot of interesting insights.
Yes, but also in some sense, working together is, according to many, a very good way to learn. So
yes, I think so too. I think students should work together.
Yeah.
So
there's a difference maybe between working together and submitting each other's work.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's, but I think that's another thing to try to get your head around, because if you're going to have argument, if you're going to sort of try to move ahead, try to be make a positive change, I think you also need to be aware and have good arguments for how to deal with some of the downsides. And I think many are probably seeing, oh, the cheating has gone up tremendously. I'm not so sure that's really true, but it probably is a bit like you mentioned, that we probably have more students who don't quite understand where the limits are. And of course, some are definitely cheating. We always have had students cheating. I mean, that's for different reasons, but yes, it's not going to be just because you go back to campus, this is going to go away. It will not.
Exactly.
So I think that's an interesting thing to look into.
As you were speaking, it occurs to me that maybe part of the reason that we see such a rise in cheating is simply because we're teaching on tools that make it easier for us to now spot when cheating occurs.
Well, yes, maybe, but also maybe it's tools that are making it easier to cheat, or not just detecting, but and so anyway, I think this is it's interesting work, and I think the working group you talked about this summer, trying to get the student perspective, I think that's very interesting. But I think all of this is interesting. Yeah. How do we? I think, like you said, the numbers you shown, they were surprising, and I think that's one reason for making research, to find surprises in some sense, or to establish that there aren't any surprises as well. But yeah, no, we are definitely in things have been accelerated, as you said, and the example Lars-Åke gave about, yes, we're keeping some of the stuff because it's better, and I think we need to make those things available, and in some sense also researched in order to kind of not just say, oh, this seems like a really good idea, or this worked well, but did it? I mean, it's so yeah.
Do we have any idea whether this this line of reasoning, keeping the good stuff that worked well, if they use that in the school system before the students come to us? Because one of the benefits we had with the new students, what they had in gymnasiet, as it's called in Sweden, they had already had distance education and with different tools. But if they are removing that from that level in the education system, I imagine, and we are keeping some of it, I can see some tension there between in the transition when coming to the university, if they are suddenly exposed to some online elements in their teaching, even for on-campus teaching. So that will be interesting to see in like 2-3 years, how new students perceive elements of online teaching.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting transition to look at, actually. I think you're lucky if you're saying that a lot of your incoming students had positive experiences with online teaching before coming to you, because what we're hearing a lot, and this isn't locally, it's from a lot of our respondents, is that many of their online students are coming dreading online teaching because they had such a poor experience before going to university. So there's a lot to look at and a lot to put together, but there's a lot of expectation setting we need to do with students, no matter what.
And I think
another big difference is that the lockdown in Sweden was very different from the lockdown in UK. I mean, it was nothing even close to what you had in UK. So
yeah, but we're also talking about international cohorts. I mean, many of our students are coming from all over the world in some sense, and they will have had quite different expectations or experiences from online. And it's also from yesterday, we got a question from a teacher in biology who said, how should we deal with students demanding to take part online? And the guy from physics said, well, we said we are not, that's something we don't provide. And I was thinking about that, Lars-Åke, when you said, well, we have quite many students who actually don't live in Uppsala, who suddenly, well, we just said, we go back on campus as if everyone lives in Uppsala, and they don't. And so how should we be dealing with that? Because I think actually this hybrid, where you talk about hybrid synchronous, is probably where people are most negative, I would say. I think that's where they have most problems. To do part of the things online or part of the things on site is easier than trying to do both at the same time. Do you have any comments on that?
I do actually. Ideally, you don't want to increase people's workload, right? So what we hear a lot is when a staff member is not only teaching online, but also has to double teach that thing on campus, so instead of spending 3 hours teaching something, they're spending 6, then it adds to their workload. When they only have 2 students coming to the on-campus bit, then they're not seeing the value in doing that. And all this has a negative repercussion on themselves and their students. But also, this is why earlier I was talking about the importance of consistency for students. A lot of students that we speak to informally say to us, I'm not in the place where I should be because I don't see the point in renting a flat and paying for accommodation when tomorrow I might not need to live there. And the case throughout 2020 and 2021 was students were feeling they were spending money on places they either didn't want to be at or that they didn't need to be at, because why am I moving halfway across the world to sit in a flat by myself to listen to an online lecture I could have listened to in India or China? So by providing consistency, if we can, by saying, look, the next year of your life will have 50% at least on campus in Uppsala, Aberdeen, whatever, then they start to see the value. I need to be there because I am going to get something out of it. But the important thing, I think, is the things we do on campus need to have added value. We can never have a position where a student is coming onto class and paying money to be there and then thinking, this would have been better online, right? It needs to be a physical activity, an interactive activity, which is exciting and also very daunting at the same time.
Yeah, but it also relates back to Anna's question about what else. So
it's the what else, that's right.
Yeah, some of the stuff that really makes it worthwhile coming is not what we do in the class, but it's what's happening by being at campus, by being in the same place as like-minded persons in a way. So I think that's and we also have this other problem where we need to say, in order for some of the students to get here, they need to get a visa. And if they can't make it clear that you need to be in Uppsala or need to, they would not get the visa. So we are definitely in need of what I think you said, this kind of clear message. What are we doing? And on the other hand, we want to be flexible. So I think we have quite a big dilemma here.
And you also have another research area. How has this influenced the faculty? Because I'm now in my office because I have another thing and I need to go in 50 minutes or something like that. And there is no one else here. Mats is at home, I guess, and I guess Lars-Åke is at home, and the other people, they aren't here. And I think I stay at home if I don't have to go to work, because I don't have very much teaching. I have most other thing when I work. And I mean, I'll stay at home, but I will soon have a new PhD students, and I think, should I really stay at home when I have a new PhD student coming? And we will have 5 PhD students. Of course, they are important to each other, but we are role models and we stay.
Of course.
I mean, I'm a bad role model, but how has, I'm used to, staying at home. I could have my pajamas under this. Well, I don't because I'm at work. Perhaps Mats has. So how does that influence the work environment, for example, for our PhD students? And for me, I come here and no one is here. I want to have a cup of coffee with someone, and Lars-Åke and Mats are not here.
I guess that depends on how large your home is also. As you said, some students had to go to the bathroom to find study peace. I mean, I think we are lucky enough to have a home that is large enough to have an office in it, unless we live alone. I think this is something which differs between students also a lot.
I've been, sorry, I'll say this and I'll let you speak. I've been chatting to a colleague of mine. She's on the student working group. She works at Edinburgh Napier University. And we've been chatting a lot about the student workplace in wherever they live. So when we as faculty moved online, we were supported in some cases, but also expected to have, you know, a desk and a computer and maybe a second monitor. And when I work at home, I have this area that you now see. Whereas what Debbie and I talk about a lot is students don't have that necessarily. We hear from students constantly that are working from their bed, right? I put my laptop on my knees or whatever. I'm still in my cover, still in my pajamas, and I'm half listening to a lecture, half sleeping. Or, you know, I don't have a desk because my room only fits a bed. So I now spend the whole day in my bed, and that's why I don't put my camera on, because why would I want people to see that? So I think there's a lot of, I think you've hit on a really interesting point. There's a lot of social cues that we don't really understand or we've not yet looked at that absolutely influence student learning. You know, when you're sitting in the bathroom doing a lecture or hiding under your covers listening to someone speak, are you getting 100% of that experience? And if not, then what can we do to help?
I think that's very interesting. And also students sometimes live together, which makes it even harder to find two study places in the same network. And at least speaking from my own experience, I mean, I was not feeling very well today. So if I hadn't been able to attend this seminar via Zoom, I wouldn't have come. And I think that is something maybe you could also consider in this, how many students are we excluding from the teaching just because we don't have it online? Or not excluding, but how many more students could have been there if we had ran it as hybrid education or something? Still, I mean...
But I think, Lars-Åke, if I can say, because I think that if we had hybrid, very many would stay at home, and students, I don't think they know what they missed out.
Yes, that's true. When we had hybrid lectures during the spring here, we had like 4 students in the lectures and 50 online. So, so it's that is definitely true. So I think one of the great benefits of being on campus is being able to sit down with other students and study together. And there's lots of students who haven't had that experience and gotten used to do that. And just being a university student is more than attending courses. It's also and not only socializing, but, you know, working together with others, interacting with others, human beings, without using a computer. And I think that is the big thing that on-campus education provides, being able to sit down together with a real living person, looking in that person's eyes and, you know, talking to that person.
Wow.
And I think it would be very interesting to like my second year students. I'm thinking maybe I should just ask them, okay, now you had 4 months of online or on-campus teaching. If you compare that to your 1.5 year of online experience, what do you think? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks of online and on-campus teaching? Because now they have experienced both.
No, I think that's sort of the part of what we had on the paper I talked about earlier on. But also, you have another aspect that comes in, sustainability. And I guess that could go both ways. But definitely you would reduce travel if you allow kind of hybrid. And quite a few of the persons in that last survey said that they did prefer to be on site, but other circumstances like travel and things like that made them choose online instead.
Mhm.
So it's there are many interesting questions. I'm trying to say. I guess.
There's definitely a larger acceptance for having guest lecturers via Zoom today, I guess. Even in a lecture hall, that you have someone who from the UK who is giving a guest lecture without having to travel to Uppsala with all this sustainability and hassle. So I think that is one of the benefits of this pandemic, if you're talking about the benefits. I mean, also, I mean, I think one of the great things about the pandemic, if you ignore all the dead people, is that now we have a global increased acceptance for digital tools, communicating using digital tools. I mean, the entire world has been forced to getting used to this. And I think this is something that will reflect into workplaces and also in education and everything. So it's going to be exciting to see what happens now in the next few years, unless we are thrown into a new pandemic.
Yeah, but this might be different because you're talking from a computer or IT department point of view. What about some others? And
yeah, not all experiences are positive.
No, and also the kind of acceptance to it. Maybe you really don't have acceptance. I think it's easier for us to accept that, yeah, these are tools that we are familiar with, as you pointed out.
I'm thinking more out in the society. Think of all the elderly people who have gotten used to keeping in touch with their grandchildren through FaceTime instead of meeting them. I mean, there's been an increase in the use of digital technology that I think can have a very positive effect if it's.
I agree. Yeah, and then it comes back to the well-being. Maybe here's an example of where this technology or this shift is positive for the well-being, but then you have, I think, quite a lot of other, I mean, your studies there, Mark, with teachers and students, or, well, at least it was about what do you think, but still the numbers were quite alarming, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's something we can't ignore. I mean, how do we, and as you also pointed out, seniors typically have a better setting, even though I've seen some seniors sitting at some sort of really kind of provisoric kind of place in a kitchen, even if they are seniors. But having been on senior teams where we meet PhD students, most of them had, you could tell this is not a perfect place to be studying or to be sort of online.
One thing that I thought was interesting now, I recall that in this course I'm teaching, the students are developing some kind of distributed systems, usually a mobile app or something like that. And last spring, they were asked to develop something on the theme like smart systems in a smart city during a pandemic. And so they had to come up with an idea for an app, develop it, and present the prototype for it. And there are lots of apps last year which was about socializing, like exercising together, even if you weren't at the same location, and doing things together through an app. So clearly the students have been missing this, because that were the kind of apps that they developed.
Yeah, no, I think that there's, again, there are potentials here.
Yeah.
But also I think some of the things, for instance, like Anna, you said, they don't know what they miss. And I think that's quite true. Yeah, so I think how do we keep a mix? How do we actually make something?
But when we talk about they don't know what they miss, are we sure that we know what they should be missing? because when we were students, at least me, Anna, and Mats are a little bit older here, I guess. The student life was maybe a little bit different than it is today. Maybe they are not missing what we think they should be missing. Maybe this is a generation question also.
No, but I think also this comes to
a little bit more. If you should research this, it's more complicated than just going out and ask students.
Yes,
I think you need different kind of data or complementing with different, because
and I think what Mark also was hinting at, getting a language. I think part of talking about what they miss, like tacit knowledge or something like that, I think this is partly really hard for us to know. I mean, like you said, Lars-Åke, do we know this, or what do we think? I think many of us could not put words to what we mean. I think we all have some sort of pretty shared view of what it is, but we are probably quite bad at expressing this or describing it.
I'm pretty sure that there is research out there, because I think I have a memory of this research that talk about the importance of being at campus and the importance of what you actually, the tacit knowledge and things you get, that is really important. I think there is all the research you can go back to, and I mean, sometimes I say to my own children that I don't think you are so very much different from me from when I was young, and then said, you didn't have internet.
Yeah, no, but on the other hand, I think, as pointed out, I mean, we have shifted quite dramatically and quickly into something which is different, which sort of provides some sort of things for that actually could build communities and connections and collaborations that we certainly didn't have. If we did not go to school, we were out of it, right? We had no option. So yes, no, I think all the research is relevant, is important, but I think it's also important to realize that the scene is much less black and white now in terms of what you get and how you. I remember 20 years ago, I was at this kind of, it was anthropologists who were talking, and they had studied youth groups in, I think it was in Oslo, where they lived in this virtual world, sort of like they didn't go out without at least having 2 full power or chargers or to their phones, because they kind of connected to the group and they were disconnected from where they were. And then, so they were studying, and this was at that time, 2000 something, but quite extreme.
Yeah,
but
I think it's
but
also
today,
extreme now.
no, but I think in many ways, what kind of world do the kids live in? How do they connect? How do they, I mean, where are they friends? I mean, normally before you would know because you would see them. Now they could talk about people I've never seen, ever heard about, and they are still kind of considered being close friends. So yes, things are different. And how do we deal with that?
Things are very different.
But
you guys have given me so much to think about.
Yeah, I need to go, but thank you, Mark, very much. This was a really interesting discussion.
Absolutely. I have a notepad filled with things to follow up about. So this was very beneficial for me. I have loved speaking to you all. So thank you for having me.
No, it was really great. And thank you for doing this and providing us with a good excuse to talk about quite important things.
Yeah,
absolutely.